Welcome to Bimadzaji Ginonindwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinaabeg Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinaabeg Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel. You may have heard that the transition to a green economy needs the critical minerals used in electric vehicles, renewable energy sources, and clean technologies. What does it mean for Anishinaabeg First Nations if a lot of these critical minerals are located on their territories? In this episode, we will hear how the Anishinaabeg Nation is supporting First Nations in addressing their concerns about mining, including pressuring the Ontario government to pause online mining claims because it's infringing on the First Nations' right to proper consultation. Our guests are Melvin Hardy, Deputy Grand Council Chief for the Northern Superior Region, and Jenny Lou Campbell, Mining Policy Analyst with the Union of Ontario Indians Lands and Resources Department. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Miigwech Auto Financing. Looking to buy a used or new vehicle? Miigwech Auto Financing has a huge inventory of cars and trucks to choose from. Good credit, no credit, bad credit, Miigwech Auto Financing can help you get that vehicle you need. Use promo code AN7GC when you purchase a vehicle at miigwechautofinancing.ca and $1,000 will be donated to the Anishinaabeg Nation 7th Generation Charity. Head on over to miigwechautofinancing.ca and use promo code AN7GC today. Before I dug into the mining question, I asked Jason Laurent, Director of the Lands and Resources Department, to share an overview of how this department is structured and what they're working on at the moment. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Let's talk about, the Lands and Resources Department at the Anishinaabeg Nation. What kind of things is this department doing, and what are, the major policy areas that Lands and Resources is working in today?
The Lands and Resource Department came to be in 2007. We work in a number of areas within the department, working with minerals, mines, trapping, agriculture, water resources, emergency management. Those are kind of our program areas in terms of where we sit now on some of these things, but in the past, and we currently still stay on top of these other issues around forestry. We look at forest management issues. We look, currently we're in discussions around working with some of our communities and looking at things around biofiber, biomass in non-forest products. We're looking at in the past we talked about the tenure reform as it relates to forestry. So we're continuing that dialogue. We worked in with our youth as well. When the Lands and Resource Department looked at the youth stewardship strategy, we worked at developing a stewardship ranger program for our communities, and other things that we've talked about relate to the land and resources in terms of water. We talked about source water protection. We talked about the health of water issues. We even gone so far as talked about water, wastewater, and drinking water management. So we did a report in that several years ago that impacted, how our communities would receive or get support, when they have boil water advisories and things like that. So, we've had some, discussions with, as it relates to kind of the broad issues on the coastal waters of fisheries. However, where our communities are situated on the inland lakes of the within the Great Lakes, but they still have the same kind of attributes as it comes to fisheries and the impacts to their communities and things like that. So. Overall, we always look at the government policies and the legislation that's out there as it relates to disposition of lands. We've talked about issues around Ontario parks. We have a big issue with our First Nations on park issues, and that goes like right across the board. We've our territory actually stems from Alderville First Nation. There's some parks in and around that area. And then we've gone all the way up to the north shore of Lake Superior, and we've had some park issues up in that area as well. So it's a huge concern for some of our communities. We've also talked about like land contamination, some other stuff that's related to it. Some things around agriculture, obviously food resources is a major issue that we're contending with right now and looking at that for our First Nations, who's gone through a pandemic, looked at some of those things for our communities and how that kind of could be something that we need to kind of beef up on in our communities. We're currently engaged in a project that we're looking to get from 6 to 12 greenhouses that we're going to be modeling in our communities. And so we've done a lot of outreach to our communities within our regions and had some discussions around, agriculture as a whole and food security. Major things, though, I think a lot of people are really interested in and continue to be interested in is around fish and wildlife. When we talk about harvesting, one of the most contentious issues that we had for a long time is inter-treaty harvesting. So that continues to be a major area of focus for us to kind of continue to combat with when we talk with government and trying to manage those issues. Wildlife management, of course, fisheries management, all those things are all in line with that. Some of our communities have great capacity, and some of them, are looking for that capacity to support. We get into more like the trapping issues. We have a trapping program right now where we issue licenses and we support our communities with that. We try to troubleshoot matters related to trap lines and things like that with our communities. It's not our forte, but our main function is to support our trappers in terms of acquiring their license so they can bring their furs to market. Obviously, we have numerous hunting issues as it relates to being on the land and the health of the population. As it relates to moose is probably another major concern just on the rise. Those are just some of the things that the Lands and Resources Department does. Really, it's important to note, though, without all this, we do have relationships, or we deal or work with the federal and provincial departments and organization within Ontario and Canada. We work with the federal and provincial departments and other organizations, First Nation organizations in Ontario. We work with the Department of Fisheries Oceans. We've done some work with the Ministry of Mines, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. We've worked with Natural Resources Canada, Ministry of Environment, just to name a few. Now we have the also Ministry of Environment as it relates to, they call themselves MECP, and today, but the First Nation organizations, I think, is where we're really rooted in some of these issues. When we talk about lands and resources, that being at the Chiefs of Ontario, we've had a good rapport and working relationship with them on several fronts as it relates to lands and resources. Other PTOs we've engaged and collaborated on things with them, and obviously direct relationship with our First Nations. And then in our Lands and Resource Department, we have a portfolio system that supports the work that we do, and they act as our champions to those issues that I've identified. In our current portfolio system includes a chief portfolio in lands resource and a deputy portfolio, and they support each of the regions as a whole within the Anishinaabe Nation. Our current portfolio for our Lands and Resource Department is Deputy Grand Chief Mel Hardy and former Chief Linda Dubosky from Chagin First Nation sits on as our portfolio holders, and they support our issues and champion matters related to the lands and resources. Also within the Lands and Resources Department, we also have a Women's Water Commission body. Over the years, that kind of subsided, but they're looking at resurrecting that body and that support that's there. And currently our Women's Water Commissioner is Autumn Pelche, and we're looking to give her some support working with some of our other communities and regions. So we have some folks and some work being done to help support that. So. We also have within the Lands Resource Department the Anishinaabe Ontario Resource Management Council. It's a relationship between the MNRF and the Anishinaabe Nation. We also have the Chiefs Committee on Environment, and they support issues around climate change and other environmental matters. We also have the Joint Advisory Council, which is a body that's embodied within the agreement we have with the Ministry of Mines, and they meet kind of quarterly and regularly to support the dialogue and discussions in and around mining. But that's the lowdown on the lands and resources.
Miigwech for that overview, Jason Laurent. Let's hear what Regional Deputy Grand Council Chief Mel Hardy and Mining Policy Analyst Jenny Lou Campbell had to share about the most important issues they're seeing in the mining sector. Welcome. Let's start with some introductions. We can start with Mel. Just let us know a little bit about yourself and your role.
Good morning. My name is Mel Hardy. I'm from Rocky Bay First Nation. That's in the Northern Superior region, and I'm the portfolio holder for lands and resources. And I've lived on the land all my life.
Hello, my name's Jenny Campbell. I'm the Mining Policy Analyst at the Anishinaabe Nation in the Lands and Resources Department. And I am from Serpent River First Nation, and I've been with the Anishinaabe Nation for almost 2 years now.
Miigwech. So today we're going to be speaking about the mining portfolio in, the lands and resources portfolio of the Anishinaabe Nation. So just to kind of help our audience, our listeners kind of learn about what the Anishinaabe Nation is doing in this area. So just generally, how has the Anishinaabe Nation been supporting, their member First Nations communities on mines and minerals issues?
So I'll start, and I think Jenny can ad-lib in here. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we do is we have regional roundtables, like for instance, for engagements. We've got the issues are being put on the table at that time from the grassroots peoples. And what we do is we strategize from that point of what we can do to address the challenge and to develop these strategies. And in each region, again, mining, I think Huron and Northern Superior regions are pretty well similar with regard to the mining style and especially the mining challenges. But down in the southwest and southeast, again, there is mining going on, but it's in a different way. They do salt mining that goes underneath the lake. And why that's concerning, that if there's a leak in the lake, that it starts, or if it busts, there's a concern about for the water as well. So yeah, it might be different, but we all have the same concerns of the adverse effects with regard to mining, because it's a very, very dirty process. So, and from there, I'll just pass on to Jenny.
So as Chief mentioned, we hold regional roundtables quarterly, and we'll go to each region, so the Northern Superior region, the Lake Huron region, and then we combine the Southeast and the Southwest regions. So we talk about everything from mining claims, exploration permits, all the way through to impact benefit agreements, joint ventures with proponents, meaning, a lot of the mining companies. And then as the mines go into closure, there's a lot of work that comes in regards to land reclamation, rehabilitation, abandoned mines that existed, 100 years ago. They didn't have any closure plans or rehab plans. So there's a lot of pressure that we're putting on Ontario to clean up those sites. As well as on top of the regional roundtables, we also hold joint advisory council meetings, and that is comprised of representatives from each of our 4 regions, where we also meet quarterly and discuss issues related to mining, concerns, as well as opportunities that there may be for our communities to enhance their participation in the sector. So a lot of my work is, as a policy analyst, there's lots of mining policies out there related to the Mining Act. That is the regulation, and there's always changes coming down the line, particularly in regards to the critical mineral strategy that was released by the province in, I want to say, 2022. Canada also released their critical mineral strategy shortly after that, and the goal of them is to try to get to net zero. So they're trying to increase the number of mines that are operating within Ontario as well as within the Anishinaabe Nation. So we support the reviewing the policies, the regulations, and then submitting recommendations to both Ontario and Canada.
What are critical minerals? What does that mean?
So critical minerals, Canada and Ontario have both developed a list of minerals. There's 31 for the provincial critical mineral strategy and 33 for the Canadian critical mineral strategy. But it's minerals such as, nickel, cobalt, titanium, anything that's going to be used to get our, shift away from carbonization to decarbonization. So that's the minerals that you need to go into the electric vehicle batteries, even wind turbines. Like there's critical minerals that they need to process in order to build structures like that. And it's not a static list. It is going to change from over time because I think the issue is that there is not enough minerals to get us to net zero right now. So that's why there's the huge push to get more out of the ground to support that transition.
So a lot of these critical minerals, then they're located in Anishinaabeg territories. Is that how it's impacting us?
Yeah.
How is that different from other mining that's already been established? Like how is this mining for critical minerals? How is that different?
So it's creating a lot of interest internationally. People want to come and invest in Ontario and Canada to help, extract those minerals, transport them, out of Canada. Sometimes they're going to go over to Europe. Some of them are going to go to China to help build all of those different components that I was talking about earlier. But within the Anishinaabe Nation, we have a lot of historical mines. And something that has just come about recently is the recovery of minerals in tailings, particularly. So proponents are now looking at going back to the tailings dams, reprocessing them. And because back in the day when they were originally mining it, they weren't valuable. It was like they wouldn't be making the money. But now there's new technology, there's innovation to help reprocess them, make it economic. And yeah, so there's a lot more interest focusing back on old abandoned mines as well as the existing mines. They've gotten the easy stuff, the stuff that's closest to surface in the open pits. The issue is as you go deeper, it costs more money. And that's, I think, where the feasibility comes in. And Canada is struggling to, we don't have enough critical mineral mines in operation. So they need more mines in order to get more minerals.
And does it kind of seem like because the strategy is already in play, there's already been plans announced for EV manufacturing plants in Canada, so is that an accelerated pace of development for this?
100%. There's specific goals that Canada and Ontario have put in place by 2030, and that's approaching very quickly. In my honest opinion, I don't think we're going to make those targets. So they're kind of reevaluating how they're going to get these mines online faster. I think that's where the issue comes in with First Nations in regards to consultation, because we feel like they're just trying to steamroll it into the development phase without proper consultation in many ways.
And one of the things that we know is that in some of the mines that's been properly closed, they're still contaminating our waters because they're improperly closed. And we have regular meetings with the Ministry of Mines, and we have that so we can talk about some of the challenges we're having. But again, our challenge is that no one is doing restoration to those mines or the waters, because you can do restoration in waters, but you need to get back up to those mines, because every time it rains in those mines, those old abandoned mines, they run up, it runs over, runs into the water, and we're back to square one again. And those things, those adverse effects, that's what's always overlooked in our territories.
Right, and that really has an effect on the land. It has an effect on the water. It has an effect on
health
animals,
of all and our people.
And the people, for sure. It's interesting, Jenny, you mentioned this consultation aspect. Can both you and Mel talk about how the consultation is really rolling out in these processes? Well,
there was a time when the mines were coming in and they were pretty well having heavy boots on the ground, meaning that they were just taking over the ground, landing there. I remember I was working in this one area, but this was in Treaty area up by Kenora. And then I was working there as a child welfare worker. But what happened is the my coworker come talk to me. She said her and her husband were up in the bush checking the trap line, and all of a sudden there was people up there, and they were drilling, and they were chasing those people, and those are trap line. They were chasing the people off their land. I said, and I had to tell them, you need to go talk to your chief and council, because what they're doing is they're doing invasive, right, and no consultation whatsoever. So when and they did go speak to the chief council, they actually didn't know what to do, and that's what happens is our people don't know how to respond. I mean, and that's one of the things why what we're trying to do is we're trying to assist them, and how can they respond and get effect with that, and have some changes, because these people didn't even know, and they're checking the trap line. So in our territories, that's going on. Now, in the older days, province and industry, they worked hand in hand. It's almost like the province downloaded that ability for them to create those mines to the mining. So the mining, then they're acting like they're in charge. Then when the First Nations, we started looking at, we need to do something change. What happened, what we found though, is now we have mining industries slowly coming over the First Nation side to some degree, because I know Jenny and I met with some industry at the PDAC. Every year they have a mining for the week. And when we go there, there's everybody from international, and there's ministers there and everything. But one of the things that we want to be able to achieve is to have a relationship with the industry as well, so that the things that we do is going to make sure, and we're getting more positive results and responses from the industry about how they do their work without tearing up the land, without dirtying the water and all.
You know, now that UNDRIP really is finally recognized by Canada and is being put into law, then hopefully this is really changing the process, you know, of consultation with First Nations and really making that, you know, a requirement.
But the province do, what they do, a lot of times when we ask these questions, the hard questions about what they're doing, they refer us back to the federal government again, because he said, that's who you're responsible, not to us, because provincial government's got a moral responsibility, fiduciaries. So that's what they're downloading it back up again. So it's almost like they're passing the buck back and forth for the accountability.
So it's really finding that balance, really, or finding, you know, that for each level of government taking the right, you know, the proper responsibility for it. So it's interesting. So you're mentioning the Lands and Resources Department is helping communities respond to mining in their communities. So, you know, in your day-to-day, how is the Anishinaabe Nation helping with that? Do you develop toolkits? Do you work with First Nations and communities individually? How does that work?
I do a little bit of all of that. One of the biggest things that I'm focusing on right now is our GeoHub. So I've started building a mining GeoHub that's hosted on the Lands and Resources GeoHub. And in there, I share information and reports. I build maps and dashboards to help inform our First Nations on the activities that are the mining activities that are happening on their lands, right from the mining claims through exploration permits, all the way to the end of the process, the mining sequence with abandoned mines. So it's just really giving them the tools and the information to help them make those informed decisions when they're, you know, just having these discussions with Ontario, with Canada, and with the proponents themselves, because there's so many different layers of mining. There's so many different activities all happening at the same time. So it's trying to understand as well the cumulative effects of the mining industry on the lands and the waters. So you can't always just look solely at the mining industry. You have to look at it as a whole. You know, when we talk about forestry, when we talk about infrastructure development, that all plays a part in it as well. I do one-on-one outreach as well. Any community that, you know, has a question or a concern, you know, my door is always open, and a lot of them do reach out to me and are looking for information from consultation frameworks that might have been developed, the different histories of the regulations. The Mining Act has gone through a modernization process. You know, I want to say maybe 5-10 years ago. We're undergoing a new one right now with the critical mineral strategy in regards to streamlining the regulations in regards to Canada and Ontario and the Impact Assessment Act.
And one of the things that we really require, you know, ensure to make this carry on, is to put building capacity in our First Nations to have knowledge base about what exactly that means. I think Jenny explained earlier about the stages of mining, but more so having a knowledge base of what the standards are, and as well what would be the standards and the environmental kind of environmental 101, to have that knowledge base, because then the only way we knew that when industry was putting stuff in the water, when we were getting boils on our feet. That's the only way we knew. Nobody told us. We're light years to hear that now. So do you know about the Middle system?
I guess it's called the Mining Lands Administration System. So
MLAS.
MLAS. Yeah. MLAS. And yeah, I hear that the Chiefs of Ontario, they called for a 365-day moratorium on the Mining Lands Administration System.
So actually, the Anishinaabe Nation did that. We did that a year before. Well, we called on that. And there was also the other parts. Another part to it too was that we had to do historical research on the effects of that MLAS system since inception.
Let's take a moment to understand MLAS and how it impacts First Nations. MLAS is an online system used to register a mining claim, manage mining claims, and apply for a prospector's license. Before MLAS, prospectors had to physically visit a claim site, hammer wooden stakes into the ground, then submit their claim. Now, prospectors simply input GPS coordinates into the online system to delineate their mining claims. MLAS allows mining claims to be staked without the required engagement or consultation with First Nations, even if the area in which the claim is staked is within their territories. In 2022, the Anishinaabe Nation Grand Council Assembly passed 2 resolutions related to mining and MLAS. Resolution number 2022-18 called for all forms of staking by Ontario to have the required consultation process, that First Nations be adequately consulted, and, where appropriate, accommodated in accordance with First Nation consultation protocols and UNDRIP. A follow-up resolution, number 2022-19, directed the Anishinaabe Nation Grand Council Chief to call upon Ontario to impose a 365-day moratorium on the online mining claims staking process. The Ministry of Mines later responded to the request by stating that a moratorium on mining was not being considered at the time as an appropriate way to resolve the Anishinaabe Nation's concerns. In January 2024, the Chiefs of Ontario, following up on a resolution passed in their assembly, also called upon Ontario to declare a territory-wide moratorium on MLAS as well.
So we're currently in the process of doing a historical analysis, like Chief shared, because now that system is online, anybody anywhere in the world can stake a claim on our lands and within our territories. And I think that's where the huge concern is there is just, it's like we're an afterthought. They have this interest in these minerals, they're staking these claims, and it's not until after that is done that we're informed that it happened.
There's a check-off box. Was the First Nation consulted? And they go, chick, and we don't even know.
Jenny, you also mentioned, the GIS systems. So, like from that system, like you're able to tell, how many mining claims there are in our territory and other kind of things. Can you talk about the kind of information, or do you have any numbers available from those maps now?
The big issue with the MLAS system is it's almost live, versus the AMIS system. I throw some acronyms out there. The Abandoned Mines Information System is more of a static inventory resource, because that data doesn't change, whereas the mining claims, over the course of a day, a month, 3 months, you can see those mining claims jump up. Certain areas in Northern Superior, almost 30% over 4 months. You saw an increase from 10,000 mining claims within proximity to a First Nation to almost 15,000. So when you put that back to capacity, how is one person supposed to be able to stay informed on those 5,000 new mining claims that happen within the span of 4 months? It's not possible, right? So what we've been able to do, and it does have its limitations, is we've developed a mining claims application in conjunction with Esri Canada. So they're the ArcGIS GIS experts, and we've been working with them a number of years now. not only to build up the GeoHub, but specifically what came out from the mining claims resolution is this tool helps keep us informed on the volume of mining claims within proximity to a First Nation. But because there's so much data, there is limitations. So if the technology is struggling to keep up and track those numbers, how are people supposed to do it as well? But we've been able to. I think I started tracking last summer. So I've almost got a year of data now from kind of like a baseline point saying, in the summer of 2022, there was 5,000 mining claims. 4 months later, there's another 5,000. Maybe 4 months later, there wasn't a huge jump. It kind of stayed the same. But it's just arming our First Nations with those numbers so that they can go and advocate to Ontario about the need for increased capacity funding and supports. Something we often hear from particularly the Ontario government is that there is the Aboriginal Participation Fund that is available to support with capacity, particularly the Mineral Development Advisors.
Limited,
yeah. The MDAs. It also supports the education relationship building activities. It supports GIS and value mapping. But we always hear that program is oversubscribed and there is no more funds available.
So it sounds like there's a real mismatch between governments wanting this mining development to happen and having, access to the minerals for their economic development plans, yet a real mismatch between, that and the needs of First Nations upon which most of the mining is happening.
yeah. David and Goliath, yep. So our moratorium, that was our plans. So when we put that in, the government sent us a letter back refusing pretty well. Right?
Yeah, so what happened is on the heels of that resolution passing, we wrote a letter to the Ontario government, particularly the Minister of Mines, George Pirie, requesting a moratorium from the Anishinaabe Nation. That letter was sent in the summer. We didn't receive a reply back until the winter, just before the holidays. And, I think we knew that they weren't going to implement the moratorium, but we just kind of had to go through the process, get them to write it out, say we're not going to implement it. And then some of our actions out of that is the historical analysis, the legal analysis on the system. I think we're seeing a lot of traction with that now in regards to what's happening out in BC. There was just a huge, I want to say win, that now they have to, overhaul their framework when it comes to mining claims. So that's something that we're monitoring very closely to see if there's any implications or learnings that we can apply here in Ontario in order to get the government to really listen to us, implement that moratorium, give us the time to understand all of the mining claims, not just the mining claims, but every single mining activity that is happening so that we can make that informed decision. And we are partners in those decisions. We're not just an afterthought. It's like, oh, you've got minerals in your territory. Now we want to have a relationship with you. That relationship needs to happen before that interest is there.
And then when we heard, we were got the letter, well, what are we going to do now? A knee-jerk reaction? No, we actually had a conversation with the Director of Environment for Chiefs of Ontario, because I actually sit on the Chiefs of Ontario Chiefs Committee on Environment. And it was about, let's get together. We need to get together. Like, all of us need to get together, and we need to have a better response to it. And this is where now there's actually a committee of various PTOs coming in, and they're sitting on the table. Now Jenny's part of it, and to talk about everything that's happening at Chiefs of Ontario. But who's got their ducks in order is Anishinaabe Nation on all fronts, because we're there, and our grassroots are calling, and we're the only ones, and we're getting calls and requests from other PTOs to assist them as well. So we're ahead of the game.
Do you have any kind of success stories, any way that really things have been done, in a good way, where the First Nation has been consulted and engaged with, a project has gone forward, and both the First Nation and the companies really have benefited from it?
I think in some of the First Nations that have a good relationship with them, it's because they're on site, and it's because they're challenging. They're seeing the relationship expand. But so yeah, there are good relationships happening, but it's always at the point of making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, and that's our relationship. I mean, but still, the fact that we know what our job is, and we don't lose sight of that. And our job is to make sure that what they're doing on our lands, that they're doing it safely. So there are success stories, but I think the success stories is that our First Nation people that are working in the mining table are getting capacity to be able to understand of what they're doing, and to be able to want to be on site to ensure that the standards are being achieved there. Because what that does and what it doesn't do for us is to make sure that the waters and the environment aren't being harmed. That's what that's all about for our people. And to have a say. So what that means is they know that they can negotiate with us when they have to. So we sit down and we work it out. Sometimes people come in and they'll pay for a mining closure right off the bat. Right off the bat, and you put that money in trust, and because they have to do a proper one, and anything else is above and beyond doesn't come out of that money. So that's what's happening. So that's our success story. There's probably more specific ones, but I think overall for all of our nations, that's what we're seeing, that our people are learning and they're going to school and they're coming back and they're actually telling them. And that's what we want. I know that's a lot, but this is what we know. And this is what we see on the ground.
Like a success story that I can think of, and it's not in Ontario, but the Tahltan Nation out in BC is a success story. I think that is something that we need to work towards, where they started kind of where we're at right now, not involved in mining. Well, not really involved. They weren't consulted on mining, but they've kind of shifted that. And now they are the ones, with the mining company, they're able to support all of their community members, send them to school from the work that they've been able to generate through the mining. So I think that's something that we can really strive towards, but we're kind of bound with Ontario and Canada because it's such different landscapes. We often look to BC for a lot of insights or success stories, best practices, but it's such a different landscape. It's not like you can just copy and paste that to Ontario because it's a totally different game.
And the province has the UNDRIP too, right? So that's beneficial. That's major.
I guess we could wrap up. Is there anything you'd like to mention then about the priorities in mining over the next, in the foreseeable future?
I think that we are only getting stronger and we're working together collectively to really raise our voice so that Ontario and Canada and the proponents start to listen, because I think they're realizing that these projects are not going to go ahead without us. So that is a huge shift that the mining industry and their mindset, I think, is currently undergoing. There is still a lot of work to do, but they're starting to recognize that anything to do with us, they can't do without us. So that's what I'll close with.
And for me, it's economic development opportunities here that we want to be part right from the start, because everything we're tearing out of our lands, we have to have that bigger piece of that pie, because it's coming from it. The other thing is, in the transport of the critical minerals from point A to point Z, we want to be able to do that. Because if we're gonna buy into it, we need to be able to do that, but we'll do it our way of how we do stuff in a way that's not going to be damaging to our lands and waters.
Thanks again to our guests in this podcast. If you want to see the amazing work the Lands and Resources team has been doing on their GeoHubs, visit Ake Gidagi Magon online, a central depository for a suite of geospatial data, tools, applications, and resources developed for Anishinaabeg First Nations. Find the link in the podcast description. Our theme music is Brothers by Wolf Sega and Chippewa Travelers. We heard 3 background tracks by Kevin MacLeod, including Boogie Party, Loopster, and Beauty Flow. Chimigwech for listening to Bimadzaji Ginonindwa. Until next time, Bama P.